There's some really good lines in that song, yes? Really good lines in that song. It's like a prayer of affirmations for us, I think. Well, as we start this month of December, this month, it seems, of Christmas, I've selected for my theme the idea of the holiday light. I love the lights at Christmas. Do you like the lights at Christmas? Whether it's lights inside people's homes on their trees or lights outside on houses or beautiful candlelight. I love light, and it just evokes for me this beautiful feeling of Christmas. And I've made an acronym on the word light, and that is living in God's highest truth. Living in God's highest truth. So I hope you'll hold on to that, not just today, but for each of the Sundays in December as we explore this theme of the light and living inside God's highest truth. When we do, we express more of the divine light that is within us. This morning, specifically, we're going to take a look at the Christ light. But I want to begin by talking a little bit about Christmas itself. You know, I've noticed inside of me over the years an evolution in the way that I experience Christmas and in the way that I look at Christmas. When I was much younger, still an adult, but much younger, Christmas was all love and joy and light and positiveness. But as I've gotten older, I've experienced that Christmas can also be very complex. That it isn't always the way it's described in those most beautiful Hallmark greeting cards. And the reason sometimes it's not is stuff happens, right? Disappointments happen, challenges happen, changes in life that might be difficult, unplanned, unexpected, and what we might label as negative happen. I'm aware that Christmas can be loving and wonderful and joyous, and I'm aware that it can be more stressful for us at times. Stress because we feel like there's so much to do and not enough time to do it. Or maybe stress because of the added financial burden that some experience at Christmas, trying to make or buy more gifts or so forth and really feeling spread thin there. Or sometimes it can be a time where we feel kind of sad because it may be the very first major holiday that we are experiencing after a significant change in our lives, maybe after a divorce, or maybe after a really serious health challenge that we've gone through, or maybe after the loss of our life partner. And so Christmas can be very complex. It is my hope, though, that we will be able to dig into the true spiritual nature of Christmas, that it might help us to live within God's highest truth, and that we might awaken to who and what we are and who and what this season truly holds for each of us. I'm reminded of the woman who went to the post office to buy some Christmas stamps for her holiday greeting cards. And she asked the clerk for 50 Christmas stamps. And he looked at her and said, "Fine, what denominations?" And she looked at him and said, "Oh my gosh, has it really come to that? Well, okay, 10 Catholic, 10 Methodist, and how about 30 Southern Baptist?" It's good to laugh. It's good to laugh together. It's good to laugh at ourselves. It's good to bring joy into each and every day. To be spiritually awake and evolving does not mean that we shut down the fullness of joy and the ability to laugh together and to laugh at ourselves. I like Dr. Seuss. Do you like Dr. Seuss? And I like some of the story of the Grinch that stole Christmas. Well, actually, the whole story. I want to read a little bit of it to you to further set the tone for us. Grinch finally found out an important truth. And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he puzzled and puzzled till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. What if Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store? What if Christmas perhaps means a little bit more? What if Christmas perhaps means a little bit more? What if Christmas perhaps means a whole lot more? That's what we want to put our arms around. One of my favorite Unity ministers, no longer with us, was Eric Butterworth. I loved his speaking ability. I loved how his mind worked. I loved the way he wrote. One of my favorite books was his book, Discover the Power Within You. This is how he approaches this topic of what is the more at Christmas. He says, "How very long have we been groping our way through darkness and ignorance, diseased, hurting, and harming, unknowing and petty, pretty un-Christ-like. But through all of this, we have dreamed of our potential for good. We have held the hope that light would be rekindled within." I like that phrase, that light would be rekindled within. Touch your heart for a moment and just quietly own that. Let light be rekindled within me. Let light be rekindled within me. He further writes, "It is this cycle of rebirth of spiritual light that is the real essence of Christmas. It is this cycle of rebirth that is the real essence of Christmas." So unpacking the Christ light. Within the life and teachings of Jesus, the pre-Easter Jesus, we have some very simple yet very powerful ideas that were the very foundation of his ministry, the very foundation of his life, that gave him the embodiment of what we now call the Christ nature. When I grew up as a younger person in the Lutheran Church, initially I honestly thought that Christ was Jesus' last name. Me too? Okay, Bobby, I feel a whole lot better. I mean, there was nowhere in my Bible that said it wasn't his last name. I just figured I had a last name, he had a last name, so that's what it was. His was Christ. And it wasn't actually until I found my way into Unity, that I learned that no, Christ was not part of his name, it was a designation. It was a title. It was a description of a state of awareness, a state of consciousness, a state of beingness that he embodied. And that not only did he embody it, but he came to help us to do the very same thing. It's important that we remember some fundamental things about Jesus. And for those of us in metaphysics, we sometimes don't quite know what to do with him, which makes it really hard at Christmas time and Easter. For some of us, because of the religion of our past and some negative or hurtful things we may have experienced there, or some very strong things that we disagreed with, we may have thrown the baby out with the bathwater because we don't know what to do with him. Or we don't like how the religious right and the church has stolen him or hijacked him. And so we don't know what to do. We need to remember, first and foremost, that he was not a Christian. You do know that, right? You do know that, right? Okay. And that the first students of his, after the disciples, were not called Christians. They were called something, I think, much more powerful. Wasn't a noun. It was a phrase that evoked action, a verb, really. They were called the followers of the way. That requires action on our part, right? One of the best ways to look at him, I think, is as a teacher and a way shower. A teacher and a way shower. He wasn't Christian, he was a Jew, a good Jew, although a really radical one, and got himself in trouble because of his radical ideas. But that was his heritage, that was his lineage. First and foremost, though, he was a teacher, and he was a mystic. He was a teacher and a mystic. I heard Bishop Yvette Flunder, when she was here during our symposium, use a phrase that I absolutely resonated with, and that is this phrase: I am a follower of Jesus before he was dumbed down. Can you relate to that? Can you relate to that? It's the idea of the pre-Easter Jesus, or what we might also call the historic Jesus. It was that Jesus that talked about the Christ light, if you will. It was that Jesus whose fundamental teachings, his ministry, his life, his way of being, was a way of being that demonstrated to all the potential to live in God's highest truth. And that the result of living in God's highest truth was a life that worked so much better on every level possible than a life lived separated from one's awareness of God and truth. So I want to share with you just 3 core ideas that I think Jesus embodied and demonstrated in such a way that it allowed him to be what we call the Christ. And if we were to take on some of these same practices and ideas, we too would find our own Christ nature, our own divine nature rising, strengthening, broadening, deepening, and expanding. First, he knew his true nature. He absolutely knew his oneness with God. He knew his true nature. He knew his oneness with God. One of the lines in the song that Janet just sang reminded us of the idea that we are not, the true of us, the deep of us, is not the result of our past mistakes, right? It's not all that stuff we've picked up and learned along the way. It is the truth of us. Our true nature is our divine nature. He said, I and the Father are one. I and the Father, I and God are one. He said, whoever has seen me has seen the Father. Can we live our lives in such a way that we can say, whoever has seen me has seen some of God? When you're driving down the freeway and somebody cuts you off, can you say in that moment, whoever looks at me as I'm driving my car sees God? If not, then welcome to the human family. We've got work to do together. He knew his true nature. He knew his oneness. But then this doctrine of the church within the first 300 years sprang up around him, the post-Easter Jesus, and this doctrine said, no, he is the only begotten Son of God. If you think about it, in a way that lets us off the hook, right? In a way, it puts him so far removed. And yet that's not the pre-Easter Jesus at all. For you see, it's important that we remember, while he knew his true nature, his oneness with God, he never claimed anything for or about himself that he did not also claim was true for everyone else. What that does is it brings him to us as a mystic, as a teacher, as a way shower, as somebody that can help us step into living in God's highest truth. I like these words from Bishop John Shelby Spong. Christianity is not about the divine becoming human so much as it is about the human becoming divine. That is a paradigm shift of the first order. Would you not agree? It sure is. So secondly, you've already heard me use this word to describe him before, but secondly, he was on a mystic's journey, a journey to help us each into this same realization of who and what we are. Again, from Bishop Spong, Jesus represents the possibilities of a new dimension of existence that transcends all the boundaries that restrict us from opening ourselves to God and allowing this source of love to flow through us. You see, as a mystic, he had an experience. He had a firsthand and an immediate experience and awakening of the God within him, and was eager to speak about that and to teach about that and to model that. Not that others would put him on a pedestal or look at him as somehow different, but that we would get it too, and that we would step into that too. That is the divine call, I believe, of a mystic and a true spiritual teacher. Not to say, hey, look at me, I've got it, worship me, because that's kind of easy to do. But instead to say, I found something, and it is real, and it is life transformative. And let me share that with you to the best of my ability, and let me invite you into your own experience of that. And when you step into your experience of that, you're going to find your life is very different than it was before. He was a mystic on a journey trying to help each of us into the same realization. But instead, in many ways, the church has done a great disservice, I believe, to what his real mission was, and has put him up here in a way that we worship instead of follow. And there's a real big difference between those two. A ministerial friend and colleague of mine told me a story that further illustrates this idea. It's a story of a seeker who heard of a council of spiritual masters that lived high on a hilltop. I don't know why they don't ever live in a place like the suburbs, but they always live high on a hilltop. Makes for a great archetypical story, right? And so this seeker wanted very much to sit at the feet of and learn from these spiritual masters. And so he sold all of his possessions and quit his normal earthly life in pursuit of making the journey to this high hilltop to sit at the feet of these masters. And as all of these journeys seem to be, they take so much longer than what you first think they're going to take, and there's hardships along the way and disappointments, and for every step or two forward, there are a few steps back. But he was relentless in his journey, and over the years, he actually caused a small group of people to journey with him who also wanted to sit at the feet of these masters. And finally, they reached the mountaintop, and they reached the abode where the masters lived. And this small group of people, so excited, for they had spent all this time and effort to be able to sit here and learn from these esteemed masters. They walk in, and they see them seated around a table wearing very special garbs, very special robes, and they walk up to them fully intent on being able to sit and learn from them, only to discover the moment they get there that all that is present in those chairs are the robes. There's no physical being there. And at first they are disappointed. And then in an instant, through the journey that they have made, they come into a very important realization that they are to put those robes on. That they are to be that master now. Can you feel into what it would be like if each of us did that in our lives? More fully, if we were to recognize that we are to put on the robes of the divine, or the robes of the Christ, or the robe of the enlightened one, not in any boastful or egotistical way, but if we were to be that, would our relationships not fundamentally shift? Would the things that frustrate us and upset us change? Would we not step into a greater degree of creativity and a much deeper and broader compassion? Would we not understand one another better, or at least be committed to doing the best to understand one another better? Of course we would. The third about the Christ light, about this man, this teacher, Jesus, was that he used his understanding of himself and others to bring forth greater good. He used his understanding of himself and of others to bring forth greater good. Consider for a moment who he associated with. He associated, by and large, with the marginalized and outcast. That's who he associated with. Consider how freely and fully he lived, despite not having a bunch of stuff. He lived fully and abundantly. Consider how fully and deeply and completely he forgave. And consider how each of these examples were a model for others. You know, the truth is, you and I are forever modeling our faith. We are forever modeling our spiritual understanding for anyone who sees us. Are we modeling what it is we deeply believe? If we were the only experience of spirituality, of a spiritual practice that someone ever came in contact with, would they be lifted up or not? And I ask these questions for all of us to examine because we are on a journey, and it is a journey of growth and unfoldment. And it is a time, I believe that you would agree with me, it is a time now more than ever before for us to be the embodiment of these teachings and this light. Because we are, not only in our country, but in our world, facing some pretty tough things right now. Would you not agree? And this is not about the election. All that is a mirror of some things that have been there for quite some time that we need to be willing to look at, and we need to be willing to model ourselves in a new and different way. I've got to believe that you are a student of unity, as am I, for a variety of reasons. For its practicality, nod your head if you're in agreement with that. For its inclusivity, yeah. For its potential to not only change individual lives, but to help to bring forth a more loving, just, and peaceful world. Yeah. And so what that means then is that we use these understandings of ourselves and others not only for a good in our own lives, but for the greater good. Jesus did that. When he sent his disciples out to share his message, he sent them by twos because he kind of knew that they might need the support of one another, because the message and the teaching that they would share, his teaching, in different communities and villages might not be readily accepted. And by sending them out by twos, he knew they would have some support with one another. He was not afraid and did not hold back the sharing of that which he found to be true about God active in his life. And he said to them, you go out and you share it as well. And if when you share, they do not accept what you have to say, simply leave and shake the dust off your feet. He didn't say stay there and try to convert them, or beat them up, or shame them, or humiliate them until they finally acquiesce and agree. He didn't. But by the same token, he didn't do what I think we sometimes do in unity, and I know I sometimes do in unity. Almost feel embarrassed or insecure in how do I talk about my faith in a way that others can really understand and in a way that can be life-transforming. I think we have some work to do there. Do you think we do? We should not be the best-kept secret in the world. That's nothing to be proud of. That's nothing to be proud of, not in the midst of a world that's hurting and that at least needs the awareness of both the teaching that we have and the power of learning and being with that teaching in community. In community. So we are needed to be the light. I want to close with a poem, and I want to close with a little bit of a story. The story is of a little girl in a Sunday school class, and it's the fall time in Sunday school. She and her family had had fun that summer. They had gone on a trip to Europe, and part of their traveling through Europe was to visit many of the beautiful cathedrals, and so many of them are filled with beautiful stained glass windows, often describing for an illiterate group of people when those churches were constructed, describing scenes from the Old Testament or the New Testament, many times filled with beautiful images of saints. And so this little girl had all of that rich experience in her mind when her Sunday school teacher asked the class if anyone knew what a saint was. True answer from this little girl. She raised her hand and was very excited because she knew she could answer the question. She said, yes, I know what a saint is. A saint is someone the light shines through. Isn't that beautiful? You're that. I'm that. We may have to dust it off a little bit. We may have let some stuff kind of cloud it, and I'm not here to do your inventory around that, and please don't do my inventory around that. I do mine pretty darn well. At least I'm sincere in attempting it. So if your stained glass window needs to be washed a little bit, wash it so that you can be that beautiful place where the light shines through. And I want to close with a piece, since I've been talking about the Christ light. This is a piece I just found yesterday afternoon. I was doing a little more background reading from one of my favorite authors. His name is Bishop John Shelby Spong. He was an Episcopalian bishop of Newark for many years, got himself in trouble with the church. I love clergy who get themselves in trouble with the church. I have great respect for clergy who get themselves in trouble with the church and nearly get themselves kicked out. Maybe I haven't done enough of that kind of stuff because I haven't been kicked out yet. But anyway, in 1974, he gave a sermon that he identified as a pivotal turning point for him in his understanding of Jesus and his understanding of Christianity and his great displeasure in church. And so he gave this sermon, and it was a pivotal turning point for him. You know, sometimes when you're speaking and you hear yourself talk, you get clear on what you think and what you feel and believe, and that was what had happened for him. There was somebody who was in the church that day who was a poet and was so moved by what Bishop Spong had shared that she took the essential ideas in that sermon and wrote this piece. There are some lines in here that I think are really profound and powerful. It's called Christ Power. Look at him. Look not at his divinity, but look rather at his freedom. Think about that for a moment. Look not at his divinity, but look rather at his freedom. Look not at the exaggerated tales of his power, but look rather at his infinite capacity to give himself away. Look not at the first century mythology that surrounds him, but look rather at his courage to be, his ability to live, and his ability to love, and the contagious quality of his love. Stop your frantic search. Be still and know that this is God, this love, this freedom, this life, this being. And when you are accepted, accept yourself. When you are forgiven, forgive yourself. When you are loved, love yourself. Grasp that Christ power and dare to be yourself. Namaste. I forgot those.